What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me as always are my three great co-hosts, Fede Perez, Maria Britos, and Ralph Hanna. And guys, it's a new month. We had a little bit of a break due to obviously my vacation over there in Paraguay, but in any case, we have a lot to talk about. Obviously, the league has officially started. The 2022 Apertura is underway. We're going to be talking about which teams are there to contend, which teams might be there to surprise, and what other teams are also featuring. Obviously, we got the Copa Libertadores happening starting today, actually. Today was the first day of the 2022 Libertadores. The first stage, we'll be talking about what Olimpia will be doing in this phase, despite a bad year for them last year. They are still in this competition, and obviously with the history that they have, let's see what kind of impact they have, and obviously talk about, unfortunately, the poor showing of the national team. As we had mentioned before in our preview episode, we had a lot of hope and hoping that Paraguay could have done something to change their ways, but unfortunately it wasn't that. So I don't want to really start on a somber note, obviously, because we kind of will mention it a bit honestly on this episode. But Fede, let's go to someone over there who apparently is as good as bowling as I thought. I figured that we would go for a big push, but apparently family ties might have interfered into that competition. But Fede, man, how are you?
I'm good, Roberto. Hi, everybody. Hey, we are back here in action in Guarani Vision. Another month. February is here. I hadn't even noticed until Roberto said it. Yeah. The love month, right? That's what we can say about February. Valentine's almost around, and football is back here officially in Paraguay, and so I'm feeling the love, and it's a good way also to get it over these tough losses that we had with our national team with the Albirroja. I actually had the pressure, just like you were saying, spending some quality time with you, Roberto. That he came by here to Paraguay. He was down here for a couple of the national team games, also because you were down here as Paraguay was taking on Uruguay. We actually made a video about that game. We didn't make an after video because we were also affected by that loss. That Uruguay took us pretty much out of the World Cup, and then we had Brazil just sweep the floor with us. I mean, that's how bad we're looking right now. We'll talk about why this all happened. We'll talk about what's going to happen with the future. We still got 2 games to play, and the next World Cup is so far away, but we still have to do something about it, right? To try to get back to it after not being able to qualify in these last 3 World Cups. We'll talk about the failure of the Albirroja, first week of the Apertura, also the big signings in the Paraguayan game. A big one is apparently, or the biggest one will be presented apparently this week. So we'll probably can talk a little bit about that on this episode or the next one, because it is a breaking news that it will probably happen this week. I think it is going to be the biggest signing, and it is Cerro Porteño taking it. Cerro Porteño that looks sharp, just like as Libertad did. I think these are the 2 teams that kind of impacted everybody in these first round of games. But let's get right to it, Roberto.
Let's get right to it. And obviously, let's go to Maria on this one because, yeah, it has actually, we needed this kind of joy of the league starting. It's been a somber note, obviously, from seeing the Paraguay national team, but also because of tragedy, unfortunately, striking at the time of, I was there as well. And, on the week, literally just last week, a week and a few days ago, obviously tragedy hitting Paraguay very, very strong. And it was really affecting as well as one of the 2 key players from Olimpia, seeing their loved ones, unfortunately, one passing away and the other one also seriously hurt.
Yeah, it was definitely very shocking news to hear that what happened in Paraguay, something that you don't really hear about in the world. There's no news of Paraguay around the world, especially of such big news like this. So obviously, my heart goes out to those 2 players. And Tito, at least he seems very strong right now. He is not letting this put him down. He lost his wife, but he's coming back stronger than ever, and he's already training with Olimpia. So he's putting himself in a position, in a strong position, to come out successfully. And I'm sure that this will impact his performance in Olimpia in a positive way. And I think that I think it'll give him more strength to continue looking forward, especially for him, especially for his children, and for the community of the Olimpia fans of Paraguay in itself. So in a lighter note, I'm looking forward to seeing a much better Olimpia this time around. And although Ralph over here gave Olimpia a pretty bad prediction, I hope that it's a much better ending of the Apertura for Olimpia this time around.
And then obviously looking at Olimpia and looking at the season as a whole, we obviously, in a way, I feel like a lot of these teams that we always talk about always have something that happens, and it kind of gives them that bit of motivation. And maybe what this happened to Tito Torres, and obviously also to Salazar, whose wife was also wounded in that shooting at San Bernardino, it could serve as some sort of motivation, Ralph. And obviously we saw that on the opening weekend in that 2-2 draw, but also heading into this game in the Copa Libertadores against Universidad Cesar Vallejo. I mean, certainly they have that sort of way of like playing for something more rather than just the history that comes to their name of obviously being Olimpia and playing in this competition.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, Roberto. Hi, everybody. Good to be back. Yeah, it's very hard to understand what can be going through people's minds that suffer these kind of tragedies, this kind of grief. But we saw the exact same thing with Cerro Porteño last season, where Chiqui Arce's son was tragically killed in a car accident midway. Well, it was about 2 weeks into the season, I think. And that sort of brought the whole squad together around him and the team around him. And we saw that throughout the season and really the outpouring of emotion when Cerro did end up winning the championship and with Olimpia as well. I mean, it's not just Olimpia, actually. It's been the whole country has kind of rallied around Ivan Torres, who is somebody that had been highly criticized, if we're very honest. Previous to this, people nicknamed him TikTok Torres because he was always on social media, much because of his wife that was an influencer. And I think, in a way, a lot of people didn't always give him the merits he deserved on the pitch, because he's won a lot of titles with Olimpia. He's been one of those key players in this, in the high points of Olimpia. But it was very interesting to see the whole country has kind of rallied around him now with this tragedy. There's not, he's a player that has played for Cerro as well. So he came through Cerro youth team, then now he's at Olimpia. So both sides of the country, because Cerro and Olimpia pretty much make up most of the support in the country, have rallied around him. And like you say, with the team as well, the kind of unity, that extra motivation to play for something, I'm sure will play a part during this first season of the year.
100%. And obviously our thoughts are given to the family of Tito Torres and obviously of Tucu Salazar. Hopefully that they will find strength into this new year. So obviously let's switch gears to obviously talk about, the national team. As we had mentioned before, we're only going to do a quick bit because I feel like there really is nothing to mention, at least not yet. Obviously, we'll get into a more in-depth episode like that I mentioned about why Paraguay failed to qualify for the World Cup. But as I had just mentioned, Paraguay are officially eliminated. We saw that on February 1st. Not before long, a 1-0 loss to Paraguay at the Uruguay win over Paraguay at La Nueva Olla. It was obviously looking in a way that Paraguay could have probably found a new mentality because of them playing in this ground. Obviously, they used to play in the Defensor del Chaco, but they have requested to play at Cerro Porteño's ground. But unfortunately, the change of scenery did not change the ways that we saw the players on the pitch. A 1-0 win, thanks to a Luis Suarez goal in the 50th minute, only made it worse when a couple days later, Paraguay had to travel to Brazil, to Belo Horizonte, to the Mineirão, to hopefully find some sort of miracle and try to surprise Brazil in any way, only to get absolutely blitzed 4-0 goals from Rafinha, Coutinho, Anthony, and Rodrigo to see Paraguay out of the World Cup for a third straight time, their longest streak in about, it's been almost 30 years over that. I think, obviously from a team that made it to 4 straight World Cups from 1998 to 2010, they are now missing their third straight one. I mean, Fede, I'll go to you on this one first, because we're obviously going to talk in depth about it next time when the qualifiers are over. We'll see that next month. But I'm looking at this side. I saw it on the game when you and I were both at La Nueva Olla against Uruguay, and then obviously seeing it on TV against Brazil. It was lifeless. You saw a side that just looked even worse than they were with Eduardo Berizzo, and obviously Barros Schelotto has only been on this job for 4 games, but it seems like nothing has changed, and that is very, very concerning for this side moving forward.
Yeah, we actually talked about it when Barros Schelotto took over, right? That, it was one of the things that we were criticizing, that maybe they took Berizzo a little too late from his job. I mean, maybe they could have let him go before, so Schelotto would have had more time with the players. He didn't have that much time. He had to make important decisions along the way. He took a couple of players that he knew pretty well. He tried to insert them into the team, but that didn't change much. Just like you were saying, you probably saw the same identity that you saw on TV right there in front of your eyes, and you just saw a team that was not coming together, a team with no reaction. I mean, they got scored on against Uruguay, and they just looked beat up. I mean, this time, this team had no spirit going forward, and I think that's what hurt people the most, that this team had no spirit to fight it. No garra, like a term that's used a lot here. This team didn't show their claws, never, especially in these last 7 games. If we take the Brazilian, the Brazil match also, I mean, 7 straight games, no scoring, you barely shoot at target. So yeah, just like you're saying, this team is looking worse now. And what did we get out of these qualifiers? We barely got any new players. Berizzo tried to bring in a lot of new guys, but not young players like Gaston Jimenez back in the days. I mean, Escubas, they brought in a lot of the mixture of Argentina with Paraguay. Those players are not in the squad anymore ever since Barros Schelotto took over. And now you're hearing our coach talk about the future, talk about that he needs time now to work, that he needs time to show new players, that these are not the games to put these kind of players in. And it's kind of weird to hear that from him, because you don't have time to waste. I mean, you got the job now. The next World Cup, yeah, it is pretty far away still, but you don't have that many games with the national team. So you got to put these players out there. And that's what I was talking about right before these games even happened, that, we were already pretty much out of the next World Cup. Why not try it? Why not put Julio Enciso as a starting player? Why not put more of those kind of players? I'm not just talking about Julio Enciso. Why not put more of those 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old players that are the future of the Paraguayan game? Those are the players that might take us to the next World Cup. This generation clearly didn't make it happen, and it's unfortunate for them also. I think the players are going to have to hold that against them too. They're going to have to, they're going to have to carry this through their whole career. They couldn't take their national team to a World Cup. And I'm talking about Gustavo Gomez, who's had a brilliant career, especially lately with Palmeiras. And I'm talking about Miguel Almiron, who's a European player playing for Newcastle, who had a great MLS career also. But they didn't have enough. They didn't have enough to qualify, and it's unfortunate for them. But they might have to leave their spot and leave it to somebody else to do the job, because we got to make some decisions about the future. And I think that's the discussion right now. And I'm not seeing much out of this new coach to really look forward to the future. I don't know what you guys think about it, but Barros Schelotto didn't show me much in these games since he took over.
Yeah, it's a direct contrast to that first game was against Uruguay, to Diego Alonso, who's come in as a new coach of Uruguay, that were in a similar position to Paraguay, maybe not quite as bad, but they got rid of Tavares, who'd been there for so long, and they said, you know what, we need something new, and we need to do something to make sure we get to the World Cup. And Diego Alonso came in, and what he did straight away is he changed a lot of players in that Uruguay team. Someone like Pelistri, who had never even been around the team, was suddenly like a starter. Whereas, and they went on, they beat us, they won the next game. They're like pretty much looking to really target that playoff spot. And what Barros Schelotto did was not really change anything. I mean, using the same set of players, a very similar system, I would say. And except the only difference with this system is it's kind of like chaos, because you can't really see any of the organization, the defensive organization that Paraguay had before. And Paraguay still have all these attacking problems. It's now 7 games without scoring, which incredibly is not the worst record in CONMEBOL. It's the joint worst, because Colombia haven't been able to score either in 7 games. But look back to when was the last time Paraguay did score? Who were involved in those goals? Where it was Kaku, who's now injured, and it was Angel Romero, who hasn't been picked because he's not playing for a club. So there's also this of the only players that were actually able to do anything are now not in a position to play, either because they're not match fit or they are injured. There's this whole kind of what's the word, like almost progression of different problems that Paraguay have. But I'm with Fede that at this point you have to just, rip it up and start again. If you don't score for 7 games and you're out of the World Cup, you don't have any competitive football now for a couple of years almost. It's time to start from scratch almost and look at Julio Enciso, get, I don't know, Matias Segovia, who's a kid at Guarani who's doing very well at the moment. Like just get the youth players and see what you can do.
Yeah, and Maria, I wanted to go to you on that one. Actually, that's a good segue. Heading into these 2 games, obviously it's at home to Ecuador and then away to Peru. I mean, if you're Guillermo Barcelona, I mean, do you pick on these young players that obviously are going to be very, very important for these for this national team moving forward? But more importantly, do you just rely on them for the next couple of years? And the players that unfortunately, Fede said, were unable to do something with this national team, your Gustavo Gomez's, your Almirons, your Alonso's, Balbuenas, all those players, you just say to them, hey, thanks for everything, but we're not going to choose you now because we want to look into a different path. I mean, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think if I'm this coach, I think he doesn't have time, like you guys were saying, and he can't be saying that he can't put the youngster into this next few games. He has no time, like Fede says. So he either has to work with what he has already, or start looking into the future and training these younger kids. Look, the players that are currently in the team, and like you say, Roberto, you can't rely on them because they've had their chance to show what they're capable of, and they didn't. So now it's time for the new ones to come in. It's really not that hard to listen to what everyone around him is telling him, to Scaloccio. It's time to move on. There's no other choice. I don't understand this reluctance to go and look at younger players. It's the next generation. What are you going to do? You're going to wait for them to grow older, and then we're going to come back into the same situation that we're in. And it looks like Fede left there for a second. He'll come back. Technical difficulties, I guess. But like I was saying, there is no more time. We have to start moving on at some point. And it also should be not just on the coach, but on the staff, on the people in the office, pushing him and supporting him in this situation and in this decision to use the younger team. So yes, in short, I think that the youngsters are obviously the future and what they should be looking into from now on, especially
Absolutely.
right now.
Absolutely. Ralph, I'll let you add on this one as well, because, unfortunately what Paraguay doesn't have in its favor is that, I think to the disadvantage of them with the likes of maybe Venezuela or Ecuador, who have exciting young players. Ecuador obviously looking very, very much closer to making to a World Cup due to their young players. But the side of that is obviously for them doing well at under 17 and under 20 level. We've seen Paraguay qualify for U17 World Cups in the past, but you haven't seen much of these players that have been translated into the national team, or have even been big stars or important players on team. But I was reading an article, I think, the other day about how a lot of the the last team, I think it was in 2015 or something, the team that was born in like 98, 99 is like a majority of them, with some certain exceptions, have just been out of the map, and are completely either inactive or just playing amateur football at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I saw a player, Claudio Correa, he was 10 years ago, was on his way to Benfica. He ended up playing for Benfica B. And now he's like disappeared into some regional league in Paraguay. He's only 28. And we've seen that a lot with many players in Paraguay that for whatever reason couldn't establish themselves in Europe. So from those young players you're talking about, I mean, even like Aderlis Gonzalez, Gustavo Gomez himself, and they didn't quite make it in Europe. They came back to South America, and there's something missing with the, I don't know if it's the players themselves, the mentality, is it the recruitment is not looking at these kind of players, or they've got the wrong representatives that are sending them to the clubs that don't make sense when they're young in Europe. I mean, there just is a whole category of issues with Paraguay at the moment, and that's why to get it to work, it has to be this job of starting from scratch and looking at the younger players and starting to really build up from thinking to 2026 is now, you're having players who are around their early 20s now. They're the ones you need to look at, because they'll be kind of heading into their prime by the time we get to the next World Cup. It's it's a big job. It's a big task. The one thing I do sympathize with Paraguay or Paraguayan organization at the moment was the pandemic. Obviously had a really big impact on youth football, because youth football wasn't allowed to continue during the lockdown. So you have almost a year that was lost, and a lot of these players, if they can't earn money playing football, or they don't have that future, they can't go a year without working. They have to go off and do something else. So you lost a lot of players because of that. Now, fortunately, youth football is back and it's organized again. We have Guarani in the under-20s Libertadores right now. They won their first game, which is a good start. But you also have the proper league kicking off at the weekend of the under-14s, under-15s, etc. Because it was a big thing that meant you missed a lot of players, because unless you were Julio Enciso, that he benefited from it because he was so good, Libertad said, well, this kid can't go a year without playing, so they promoted him to the first team very young, and that's, we can see the benefit of that because he's doing so well. But for a lot of players, we missed that opportunity because of the pandemic. So on that note, I do sympathize. But in a World Cup qualification situation, all the other teams have suffered similar problems with the youth setup because of the pretty much like a year or 18 months they missed out on.
And obviously, we will continue our discussion on the national team and its failure for not making it to a third consecutive World Cup next month when the qualifiers officially end, as we will go all in depth and perhaps go all out on what's going on with the national team and even the FA as well. So stay tuned for that on a future episode. As we now switch gears to what's been going on with the Apertura. Is officially started over the weekend as well. As Fede had mentioned, obviously we saw all the teams that are in action in our national league. For the first time, actually, we've got 12 teams in the league. Beforehand, it was only 10, but thanks to, obviously, with the pandemic happening and now everything going back to normal, we have 12 teams a part of this. Of that, we have also 4 promoted sides, Resistencia, General Caballero de Juan León Mallorquín, Sportivo Ameliano, and 12 de Octubre, and Tacuarembó also coming in to this side. So obviously it's a very much different league action that we're going to get to, but obviously I think the first one that we have to mention is looking at the favorites so far. We look at Libertad and Cerro Porteño going all out, starting off well, a 3-2 win for Cerro Porteño on Sunday, hoping to be a team that is going to be straightened with a new number 9. The new number 9 is, of course, possibly going to be Marcelo Martins Moreno, the Bolivian player, the all-time Bolivian national team goal scorer, the current goal scorer in the current qualifiers, guys, actually, with 10 goals. Obviously we'll keep an eye on to see if that will be the number 9 for Cerro Porteño. That will only make them even more stronger. We saw Olimpia drawing the newly promoted side, General Caballero Juan León Mallorquín, who gave him a good battle over there para uno. So it's very much impressive to see that. But of course, I think the one that we have to start off with is Libertad, the side that only got more stronger with so many players coming in. Obviously, Roque Santa Cruz, making a transfer that I think a lot of people was unthinkable, heading from Olimpia to Libertad, obviously with a really strong side all around, with the experience of the likes of Christian Riveros, Miguel Zamudio, William Mendieta, and an 18-year-old sensation that many people thought was going to be playing for the Seagulls of Brighton this week, actually, but because of a issue in personal terms, Julio Enciso will actually be staying at Libertad for the time being. And Rob, I'll go to you on this one. Boy, if the Brighton Bass felt a little bit disappointed in not getting their player, what a way to start off his season with a hat trick against 12 de Octubre, no less, and really impressive performance to become the youngest player of the 21st century in Paraguay to score a hat trick in the Paraguayan league. So what a way to show that Libertad are really serious. And obviously we saw a goal from Santa Cruz as well. But no, I think all the headlines have to go for Enciso for that wonderful performance against the side from Itagua.
It was a fantastic response from Julio Enciso because, like you mentioned, I mean, he should have been at Brighton because Brighton did the hard bit, which is they got the terms agreed with Libertad because Libertad do not sell cheap. And then it sounds like a really contentious move by the agent that didn't want to take the payment terms. I don't know what it was, but it's something that surely the player would have preferred if he had been in charge of his own destiny to be in the Premier League at this point. And then, so you wonder, how's he going to respond to this? Because it wasn't just that. He also then, this move broke down just before the Brazil game, which he was also involved in, and Paraguay suffered that pretty much record defeat against Brazil. It's one of their worst defeats to Brazil. And you wondered, like, oof, that's been a tough week for this kid. What's he going to do? Thrown in, he has to play against 12 de Octubre. Not even at home, he has to travel a little bit to Itagua, and will he really be up for it? And well, there was his response. And this is the thing I think that's made Julio Enciso such an interesting player. You get a lot of talented kids coming through in Paraguay. We have some, they go off and they come back. We mentioned Delis Gonzalez earlier, but also Sergio Diaz went to Real Madrid as a kid. He's back at Cerro, where he started now. These players can be very talented, but do they have the mentality for it? And everything Enciso's shown up to this point in his short career shows that he does have that temperament and that mentality. He takes penalties. He scored a penalty in this game. And that's when you have people like Roque Santa Cruz next to you, and he's still stepping up and putting penalties away. So he has a really bright future. And Libertad looked very strong, as you mentioned. Seeing Roque Santa Cruz score a goal for Libertad was still, I found it very strange. It didn't quite register at first that he was there doing that. And yeah, I mean, Libertad looked very strong. What we have to see with them, and this will be the same with Cerro as we talk about them, what happens once the group stages start in Libertadores and they have to go and decide who their best team is, because that distracts them. And we saw it distracted them last season with the Sudamericana. But great start. I mean, perfect start, really winning 6-1.
Go in, Fede. I mean, obviously looking into that side, I mean, Libertad obviously are the ones that are there to contend, but looking at Cerro Porteño as well, okay, it was against the side that was recently promoted in Sportivo Ameliano, and they almost blew it over the end. But nevertheless, I mean, you're looking at a side that is not even at its strongest, or even way better than what we can even expect from this side, yet they look like no one is stopping them, and they're going to continue their dominance of being a huge favorite for this league.
Yeah, they actually played a very weak 12 de Octubre, and I was actually pretty shocked to see that team be so weak, just because their manager usually builds up a pretty good team. But they brought up a whole new roster of players that weren't really getting a game time in other places. And, you know, when you're trying to build that kind of team against an elite team, which is Libertad, because that's what Libertad is right now. In the Paraguayan game, I mean, it's the team with the biggest budget. It's the team that can take any player they want, and they did that in this transfer markets season also, just because they took Roque Santa Cruz, they took Willie Mendieta, they took the players that they wanted, they took the players that the manager also wanted, especially because he wanted competition. He said it after this first game. He wants a lot of players. He wants a lot of good players in the squad because he wants competition in between them. And hopefully he's going to be smart about giving them game time. I mean, it's not easy to handle having a Roque Santa Cruz and having a Tacuara Cardoso in the same squad and having to pick from one of those two players, especially when those big games come up. That's when I want to see Garnero make the right calls and see if he can build that super team that Libertad looks like they can be, right? I don't think it's parameter this 12 de Octubre. I do think that maybe in a couple matches we'll see the best out of Libertad, especially when they play Libertadores. And in the third week, I was looking at the calendar and they have to play Olimpia. I mean, if it was strange for Ralph to see Roque with a Libertad jersey, that's going to be an exciting one to see Roque play against his former club, Olimpia, especially the way he left and going to this Libertad squad that, you know, lately is trying to win titles just as Cerro Porteño is. Cerro Porteño has been the historical rival for Olimpia, and the rivalry with Libertad has popped up lately also because of these transfer situations, because of how the teams get along, and they managed to keep Julio Enciso. I mean, that's pretty much. I think that also gives them firepower. I mean, this kid just scored a couple goals on his first game, and I loved what Raf was saying. I mean, this talks about the character of the kid, right? I mean, this talks about what he's made out of, and you know, this is a kid that's focused on what he's doing, and he looks so calm, and he has all these players that have been to Europe, and you know, they're pretty much his teachers, his mentors right now, and I think he's taking advice from them also, and that must help him out a lot. And even though he dyed his hair blonde, which is something that Roberto apparently doesn't like, I'm gonna let it pass because he's still scoring, because he's still looking like a top player here in the Paraguayan game. So if he wants to dye his hair, if he wants to get a couple of tattoos, he's already 18 years old, Roberto. Let him do his thing.
Hey, maybe it's I guess blondes do it best apparently. So maybe he wanted to stand out, and rightly so. Hey, go for it, man. Go for it, kid. But no, an impressive performance by him. And this, again, like Ralph had mentioned, like all of us have seen of him so far. I mean, this is only the beginning, you know, for someone that's 18 years old who's already accomplished so much. Sky's the limit for him. And hopefully we do see him in Europe very, very soon. But obviously looking into Cerro Porteño as well, aside that, obviously was without their goalkeeper Jean Fede. I mean, obviously they were still waiting for their new striker, and you know, rightly so. I think this is a side that can be much, much better than what it is, and I don't see this side really declining in any way. Yes, I think the defense could obviously be much, much better, obviously from conceding those 2 late goals to Sportivo Avellano, but nevertheless, Chiqui Arce has really gotten the side really working like a well-oiled machine, just like he's been doing for the last year or so with the Cerro side.
Yeah, and I'm actually hoping for what you're saying, for this team to even get it better. I mean, we're seeing a really good version of one of their stars, which is Claudio Aquino. He ended the year last year as you know, one of the best players in the Paraguayan game. I hope he has a really good Libertadores. Cerro's going to need that out of him. He didn't have a good Libertadores last year. That's what I think. We saw the best from him from half year on. So they're gonna need that. They're gonna need that from him. You know, they're gonna need for him to take over in some points of the game. And that midfield's looking a lot better also with Carrascal, with Pica Lucena. They're getting along a lot better. And Cerro, I think, brought the right players in. They're finding solutions in the left back position. They have Alberto Espinola back 100%, and he's a very important player also for their build, for the way they built football, all the way from their defense. And yeah, of course, they're missing a couple of players. The goalkeeper Jean Pierre is out for a couple of games. He's suspended. Juan Patiño also was suspended. Alan Benitez was also suspended, but that just gives opportunity to other players like Enzo Jimenez. He came back, he got the starting role in the midfield, and he was able to score in this first game. And that talks about what kind of squad Cerro Porteño has. They have the players ready, and Chiqui Arce is just doing a great job. He got a 3-year contract at the beginning of the year, so he's going to be working long term in Cerro Porteño. This is good news, I think, for Cerro Porteño, especially for Chiqui Arce, because this is his spot in the world. This is where he wants to work, and he wants to take Cerro Porteño as far as they can in the Libertadores. Can they win it with this team? It looks kind of hard, right? Because of how strong Brazilian teams are, how strong the Argentinian sides. But hey, this team can get a lot better with their new striker. I mean, they're not bringing just any player. They're bringing the top scorer of the South American qualifiers. They brought a really good player, and he's just 33 years old. I mean, he's not just coming for this season. He might stay a couple of years here in Paraguay. So hopefully Cerro Porteño gets the best out of him, and they're going to need him if they want to score a lot of goals. And next to him is going to be Pantera Morales, who's been just a hot striker. He's really young. He has a great career ahead of him. So you look at this Cerro Porteño squad, and you see a lot of potential in it. Hopefully they can get the best out of this team this year, because I think Cerro fans are hoping that this team has a really good Libertadores.
And looking into Olimpia as well, Maria, to close it out. I mean, like Ralph had mentioned in his preview, if anyone has mentioned it, hasn't gone yet on the Paraguay football blog. Obviously, check it out and give me that plug over there, Ralph. But looking at Olympia's side, that's, obviously, despite the awful season that they had last year, the fact that they still finished with 2 trophies at the end of the season, this is still a side that, unfortunately is not able to contend for this title. I think obviously they lost a lot of players, obviously the key one being Roque Santa Cruz going to Libertad. They have some issues with some unpaid debts, so they won't be able to really make any signings. And obviously with a young manager like Julio César Cáceres, obviously has played Olimpia, captain Olimpia at one point as well. This is a team where I know the history is there. I know they have all the expectation because of what they are, but you have to just face the reality of it all, is that this is a side that is just looking to move afloat and just try to finish at the top of half of the table, at least for this season, see what they can do, what they can build on, see if there's any interesting youngsters that come up and work from there. I mean, there's nothing really more to ask for, because this Olimpia side that they have right now, and we even saw it in the game on the weekend against General Caballero Juan León Mallorquín. This side is just, it's not good enough, unfortunately, to contend.
Unfortunately, yeah, you guys are saying they did have sort of a good start to this Apertura, but not so good, because they ended up drawing.
Drawing, yeah, exactly.
Drawing.
At home, no less, and also
home,
losing that lead.
Correct. Yes. And against General Caballero. So I mean, it's an okay start. It's the first game of the Apertura, but we all know this competition is very short. So we need to get wins. If not, you're out of the contention for the title. So it's going to be another hard season for Olimpia. They're not there financially again. They're still struggling, and they have some quality players. You can't always rely on bringing in new players, but they could look into the young players into the academy and bring them in and work them in, so that you have an advantage once you do get to bring in other players, transfers and all that. You have backup players that you were able to work on with the academy. So Olimpia can take this year more or less to rebuild what they have and start and make it sort of like a testing trial kind of year. Obviously, hopefully they don't end low of the table or stay low of the table like they did in the Clausura. Hopefully they still get to stay up top and continue trying to at least stay in other competitions and some cups here and there, that they can win some money out of that, and it can help them financially to put themselves back on their feet. So it's going to be a tough one for Cáceres. I think that he's going to face a lot of criticisms, but I think that the fans should really understand that it's a new era for Olimpia. It's time for them to look into the future and see what they can already improve. Obviously, they have all those years, like you say, the traditions and the history behind them that doesn't really work in their favor, but it is it's always good to look into the future and work for something much better.
In the way, looking at the Paraguay national team, there's kind of those parallels with Olimpia as well. But obviously, closing it here, and it's a good point that you mentioned, Maria, about Olimpia needing that financial gain and obviously surplus, because they can obviously get that now in the competition that they'll be playing in the Copa Libertadores, as they kick off the first Paraguayan team to kick off the Libertadores. For Olimpia, they will be playing against the Peruvian side, Universidad Cesar Vallejo. And Ralph, you put a good little preview on this game. Obviously, the big one, I think, more than anything, is seeing that Tito Torres has made the squad despite all the tragedy that he had been through just a week ago over there in San Bernardino with the death of his wife. The fact that he's still training and he's still finding that strength could give that kind of motivation for Olimpia. But nevertheless, looking at this side and looking at what they have, and this is obviously nothing against the Peruvian sides as well, but surely they can take something out of there in Peru to then also take them back to Paraguay to hopefully see them qualify for the next round of the Libertadores.
Yeah, I think it's picking up on the point that they had a very bad year last year, yet they still made the quarterfinals of the Libertadores and they still picked up 2 trophies in Paraguay. I mean, that talks a lot about their pedigree now and their history. And that plays a big part, I think, in especially these early rounds of the Libertadores. Universidad Cesar Vallejo, a team from Trujillo, which is in the north of Peru, but I don't know why, but for whatever reason, they can't play there. So they're playing in the national stadium in Lima. So it's kind of essentially like a neutral venue for them. So that helps, I think, Olimpia, that they don't have to go on the away trip. It's a shorter trip as well, because they get the direct flight to Lima instead of having to do 2. So there's a few things already pushing in Olimpia's favor. But then you look at the team as well of the Peruvians. This is only the third participation in the Copa Libertadores, 2013, 2021. Both times they got knocked out in the first round. Last season, they got knocked out in this first qualifying round to Caracas. They didn't even score against Caracas. So, I mean, the pedigree, the difference is there. This is probably, for the Peruvians, this is their best ever chance they'll get to beat somebody like Olimpia, because this is one of the worst Olimpias historically that's bad enough that still qualifies for the Libertadores, right? So it gives them maybe some motivation there, but I do think there's a stronger team there with Olimpia. Look at some of the players, just people like, we've mentioned Delis Gonzalez now a lot today on this episode, but I think he's going to be a really key player now that Roque Santa Cruz is gone. But then you saw at the weekend someone like Santi Vera come on in the second half and looked very sharp, the young Argentinian player that they have on their books. Then they're going to have people like Antolin Alcaraz, who's won the FA Cup with Wigan. He's in central defense. The team still has some pedigree there, and I'm sure they'll have enough for this first round tie. Maybe they don't win tomorrow. I did put in the prediction that they'd win 1-0. Maybe they don't win, but I'm sure they'll have enough taking it back to the home leg.
Definitely, and obviously we'll keep an eye on what's going on with Olimpia heading into obviously the Copa Libertadores, and obviously looking ahead to what's going on in the Apertura, as it should hopefully be an exciting race. We already saw some exciting races beforehand. Let's hope we see another one heading into this season. So obviously, I think this is the best way to close out another great episode of Guarani Vision. So for myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, Maria Britos, and Ralph Hanna, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.